Hello and welcome to the world of Pushkar's Wiki. 19th and earlier 20th century was a time of great change in Europe and the world. The Russian Revolution was a turning point in world history. It showed how people could overthrow centuries of monarchy and inequality and dream of a society based on equality and socialism. Today I will explain about the Russian Revolution, which is the rising of conservatives, liberals and radical concepts. In the early 20th century was the age when monarchies, traditions, and old systems were questioned. New ideas of equality, freedom, and justice started shaping societies. Some argued for slow and steady change, while others demanded a dramatic restructuring of the social order. In this debate, three broad ideologies emerged: conservatives, liberals, and radicals, each with its own vision for the future. The age of social change. During the 18th and 19th century, industrialization and French Revolution brought new ideas into Europe. Societies were divided into aristocracy, nobles, clergy, and common people earlier, but now a new middle class. Merchants, professionals, and industrialists began rising. People started debating who should rule. Should monarchies control? Should monarchies continue, or should people have rights? How should wealth and property be shared? This was called the age of social change because different groups, liberals, radicals, conservatives, and socialists, offered different answers. Conservatives. They wanted to preserve traditional institutions like monarchy and established church, believed sudden change would be dangerous. But after the French Revolution, they accepted that the change was inevitable, so they supported slow and gradual reform, not revolutions. Liberals, on the other hand, sought gradual reform. They supported individual rights, representative government, and equality before the law. They were not necessarily in favor of extending political power to all, but many liberals believed that only the educated and property owning classes should participate in governance, believed in freedom of markets, free trade, and private property. But they were not fully democratic. They didn't want voting rights for all, only property owning men. And radicals went further. They were more extreme than liberals, wanted a democratic government where the majority could vote, opposed the privileges of landowners and wealthy factory owners, supported women's suffrage and equality in politics. They favored cooperatives in industries rather than private monopolies. They argued for universal suffrage, social equality, and often drew inspiration from socialists and revolutionary movements. To them, society needed more than reform, and it required a complete restructuring to ensure justice for all, especially the working class and peasants. It was in this climate of clashing ideologies that Russian Revolution unfolded, marking one of the most dramatic turning points in modern history. The idea of socialism had emerged as a reaction against industrial capitalism. Socialists believed that the private property created inequality. Society should work collectively for the welfare of all. Wealth should be shared, not concentrated in the hands of a few. Early socialists like Robert Owen set up cooperative communities, while others wanted revolutionary changes. Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, authors of the Communist Manifesto, said workers would overthrow capitalists. The Russian Revolution. Reasons and beginning. Russia in the earlier 20th century was different from Western Europe. It was ruled by Tsar Nicholas, an autocratic monarch with no constitution and no parliament with real power. The Tsar relied on the army, nobility, and Orthodox Church to maintain control. Russian society was highly unequal. There was vast population of peasants. Over 80% of the population lived in poverty, heavily taxed and often faced famines, and were working on noble lands. Industrial workers suffered long hours, low wages and unsafe conditions. There was no political rights and opposition was brutally crushed. Russia was economically backward compared to Western Europe. Rapid industrialization in the late 19th century led to poor working conditions and labor unrest. Inspired by Karl Marx, Russian intellectuals and revolutionaries like Lenin argued for socialism. They wanted to overthrow the Tsar and redistribute land and wealth to workers and peasants. Moving to the causes of revolution. First is the 1905 Bloody Sunday event was the foundation of Russian Revolution. On 22nd January 1905, workers in St. Petersburg, led by Father Gapon, marched peacefully to the Tsar's Winter Palace. They carried petitions demanding better wages, working hours, and freedom of speech. The Tsar's soldiers fired on unarmed protesters, killing and wounding hundreds. This day became known as Bloody Sunday. This shook people's faith in the Tsar. Bloody Sunday sparked strikes, protests, and uprisings across Russia. Workers formed Soviets or councils to organize strikes. The peasants revolted against landlords, and soldiers mutinied in some places. This massacre destroyed faith in the Little Father, the Tsar, and triggered nationwide strikes, protests, and uprisings. The Tsar was forced to create the Duma, the parliament, but he soon dissolved it and retained power, showing his unwillingness to share authority. First World War 1914 to 1918 is another reason for revolution. In 1914, just before the World War, the Russian Empire was the largest country in the world, covering much of the Eastern Europe, Central Asia, and Northern Asia, which is Siberia. Russia entered World War I in 1914 but was unprepared and suffered huge losses. Over 7 million soldiers killed or wounded, causing anger among troops and families. Soldiers lacked weapons, food, and proper clothing. The economy collapsed, shortages of bread and fuel spread, and people blamed Tsar Nicholas and his unpopular German-born wife Alexandra. The Tsar's decision to personally command the army further weakened his rule as failures were blamed directly on him. Another event was February Revolution 1917. Workers and soldiers protested in Petrograd. The Tsar was forced to abdicate. His wife Tsarina Alexandra was unpopular and influenced by Rasputin, a mystic. A provisional government was formed, but it failed to solve food, land, and peace issues. In October Revolution 1917, led by Lenin and the Bolsheviks, who promised peace, land, and bread, and they overthrew the provisional government and established a socialist state. Now we will know about the results of Russian Revolution, which impacted the world. End of the Tsarist monarchy. The centuries-old autocratic rule of the Tsars was overthrown, ending the Romanov dynasty. Land redistribution. Large estates were taken from nobles and distributed among peasants, addressing rural unrest. Nationalization of industries. Major factories, banks, and other key sectors were brought under state control, moving towards a socialist economy. Establishment of a communist government. Under Lenin's leadership, the Bolsheviks set up a new government based on Marxist principles, laying the foundation of Soviet Union. Global impact. The revolution inspired communist and anti-colonial movements across the world, influencing countries like China, Cuba, and Vietnam. Russian Civil War and aftermath. 1918 to 1921. Civil War. Fierce fighting erupted between the Reds, Bolsheviks, and the Whites, which were the monarchists, liberals, and foreign-backed forces. July 17, 1918. Execution of the Tsar. Tsar Nicholas II and his wife and his family were executed in Yekaterinburg to prevent their rescue by anti-Bolshevik forces. 1919 to 1920. Foreign intervention. Countries like the UK, France, USA, and Japan intervened but failed. The Bolsheviks eventually secured full control of Russia. 1921. Crisis and reforms. A devastating famine and the Kronstadt rebellion by sailors, once loyal to the Bolsheviks, forced Lenin to introduce the NEP, New Economic Policy, allowing limited capitalism to revive the economy. 1922. Birth of the USSR. The Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, USSR, was officially established, uniting several republics under a single socialist federation. 1924. Lenin's death and power struggle. After Lenin's death, a leadership struggle ensued. Joseph Stalin eventually emerged as the new leader, shaping the Soviet Union's future. In short, harsh autocracy, economic suffering, and social inequality fueled discontent. Bloody Sunday 1905 exposed Tsarist cruelty. World War I worsened crisis, leading to the 1917 revolutions. The Bolsheviks rose to power, creating the USSR and paving the way for communist rule. Thank you for watching this video.